My name is John Jackson. I'm going to be presenting a little bit about how AWS chose Apache Airflow to power our next generation Amazon SageMaker. I'll then bring up Kamen's going to come out partway through and give a little demonstration on how it all works. Really, this topic is about something that many of the folks that are attending this conference have to do all the time, which is really standardizing how your team interacts with data and ML. Right. And really highlight some of the challenges and decisions you'll have to doing that. I know that many folks you're responsible for making sure that your team gets their Airflow deployments, that your team gets their data access, that everything works seamlessly together. And this isn't a spoiler. Airflow is going to play very big in this. I don't think it'd be a weird topic if I didn't mention Airflow in it, and this is obviously very central to it. So. But as I often like to do, I want to start a little bit with a bit of a history, a bit of a historical anecdote to get us started. So we're going to go back a bit, even before Airflow 0.1. That was 2014. We're going to go back to the late 1800s. And so back then, if you wanted a car, you didn't go into a dealership. There was nowhere to go and just buy it, right? There's no showroom. You essentially visited what was a glorified blacksmith shop. You go in, you talk to the guy, and then the person would, and yes, it was all guys back then. And each automobile was built by hand, right? The craftsmen, they'd pour metal castings, shape the parts with hammers, adjust every bolt and nut until it fit together, at least mostly fit together. These weren't perfect. They were all handmade. Every car was unique. They were beautiful, but they were also very unpredictable. And this was great for the pioneers, just, this first horseless carriage thing. But it really didn't scale, right? And that's sort of where we want to start the story, is about how do you scale this sort of thing? So there's a legend that came out that the only two cars in Ohio I think the year 1900, the only two cars in Ohio crashed. That's actually a myth. It was actually Ripley's Believe It or Not had said that was a truth, but it wasn't. That wasn't what happened. What is true, that in 1891 there was a guy named James Lambert in Ohio, and he built one of the first gasoline-powered automobiles. And in 1895, he crashed it, and that was the first documented automobile crash that did happen in Ohio. Now, there's something we can learn from that first automobile crash. So he hit a tree root, he lost control, and he hit a hitching post. And it wasn't just bad luck. This was about inconsistency and lack of scale, right? So what's about the lack of scale? Well, back then, there weren't very many automobiles at all, right? So the roads weren't meant for cars. There was obviously routes and stuff. These were meant for horses and the occasional wagon, right? There wasn't the scale to have the roads improved for automobiles. Also, every automobile behaved differently, right? There was obviously no standards about, traction control. There wasn't even an idea of what happens, for the suspension or anything else. Every single one was different. There was no testing. There was no standards. And when he did break it, there was no replacement parts. Everything was completely unique. When you broke something, you went back to the craftsman, you put it back together, right? So these early innovations were really smart, but they were isolated. So if you go ahead to Detroit around 1908, Henry Ford is looking at his plant for Model Ts, and he sees all of his craftsmen individually making vehicles. And then he looks over to a nearby meat processing plant, and he basically sees a whole cow go on one end and steaks coming out the other. And he's like, why can't we do that with our cars? Why can't we create an assembly line where everything, where raw materials come in one side and cars come out the other side? And when he did so, he broke the whole process into 84 individual steps. And the time it took to build a Model T went from 12 hours to 93 minutes, right? Pretty big scale improvement. And so this wasn't just efficiency either, it was reliability. Everything was done the same way every time. All the parts were interchangeable, all of its costs plummeted. In fact, the cost fell so much that for the first time ever, the people building cars could afford to buy them. Right? He didn't just build cars faster, he built a process. And then if you fast forward to the late 30s, just down the road from here in Boeing, Boeing was very successful with their 247, and then they were asked during the Second World War to build B-17 flying fortresses. So now all of a sudden, they're having to build thousands of these things. And now all of a sudden, it's not just scale, but it's accuracy, right? Now it's not, if you have a loose bolt on a Model T, you're stuck at the side of the road. You have a loose bolt on a B-17 at 10,000 feet, you've got a catastrophe. So now not only was it massive scale, but precision. So Boeing transformed all this production to this moving assembly line, repeatable, complex tasks, and it became a disciplined process, right? The balance between speed and precision. So let's jump ahead nearly a century to data and machine learning. So AWS, we started out the same way. We gave everyone tools, right? We would give we supplied the tool shelf. And we'd have tools like SageMaker and Glue and Athena and let you build whatever custom solution you wanted. But there's a limit to that. We were supplying the craftsmen on this. And this is very much like in your organization, if you were just simply enabling these tools, right? Just allowing, say, hey, you guys can use this. And there's lots of organizations that do that. We allow you to use in whatever cloud provider you have. We allow you to open these up. But the reality is there's only so many craftsmen. There's only so many people that know how to use those tools. And for us, what it made sense to do was say, well, can we do more than just provide the tools? And can we provide the assembly line? Can we empower people to go from that individual craft-built automobile to the precision of an entire assembly line full of B-17s? And this is really what a lot of folks that are here attending this conference, and presumably a lot of folks in this room, are tasked to do within their organization. Right? Give your users something that's reproducible, that's definable, that solves their needs without you having to create something custom for every single team that you have to support. Right? Provide your organization a standardized developer assembly line where they can build and test and scale their data pipelines without reinventing this stuff from scratch, without having to open a ticket for everything that they need to do. So, obviously, in order to provide this assembly line, we need something reliable to power that. So that's where we went with Airflow, right? Airflow is that conveyor system, right? It's the thing that moves your data from one place to the next. It's the thing that powers that Model T along the assembly line, right? It provides clean integration. It hides the complexity where you need the simplicity. It exposes power when you need that level of control. It's standardized, it's scalable. It's all the things you already know about Airflow. It also offers a migration path, either from someone's built, existing Airflow deployments or other orchestration environments. It's very flexible that way. So Airflow gives you the ability to turn that experimentation into something that's repeatably producible. But it's not easy to standardize, right? Standardization, and I'm sure you've run into this if you've tried to do this within your organization, it has its own challenges, right? The first thing you have to understand is how do we version this thing? Like, what do we provide when people want new things, the latest and greatest, right? How much customization is too much, right? How much do we let them modify their vehicle? How do we manage all this infrastructure without having to deal with an endless barrage of tickets from different teams within my organization? And how do we simplify the complexity for the users that maybe aren't as sophisticated as some of the other ones? So let's start with version control. So one thing we chose to do within the next generation of SageMaker was we standardized on Git, right? You have to have some sort of version controlling on this. We use Git. I'm sure a lot of you folks do. You might use other things as well. But we made it so every project that a team created had its own Git repository that kept itself isolated, right? So think about the way that you want to have your team manage their versions. The other thing we chose, which was a little controversial, is we locked down the Airflow version, right? Wouldn't let you just pick whatever. And I think a lot of you folks have had to make that choice within your organization as well. Just say, right, it's not for every one version, but for now we had to pick one version to ensure that reliability and stability. And then we also included very clear environments. With this, we actually deployed a standalone for every single user gets their own isolated Airflow, open source Airflow environment that runs in the cloud. They can run their own workflows. They can test it without breaking anyone else's stuff. That's key. And they can also then deploy to the centralized project environment, and each project provisions its own Airflow environment for the team to use within that project. So we also had to balance those customization needs. As I said, I'm sure you get this too. Your users are going to say, well, I want the latest Airflow version. I just saw this awesome presentation on 3.1. I want it, please. Well, Henry Ford famously said, you can have your Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. Now, he wasn't against creativity. He was for throughput. The black paint dried quicker and was cheaper. That's all. It's not because he didn't want you to have a pink Model T. It's just that it didn't make sense in the production line. So you've got to balance when you're offering this to your team, what makes sense for what can you reasonably support that doesn't get in the way. If you want to customize it, if you want to support a couple of Airflow versions, do you have the internal team capacity to be able to support multiple versions on that? Do you have a way to migrate them out through those? You can decide how much customization do we support. So in our case, we still let you bring in your own libraries and things like that in there to test it out, but we limit what you can do at the actual environment level as far as modification there. And the standardization, again, is not about restrictions, it's about focus, right? You want to focus your team on not about infrastructure, not about all the other things they're trying to consider, but about making sure that the things they're doing are reliable and you can support them as your team. And then about the infrastructure, one of the things we did too was, obviously, I'm sure you don't want to give everyone within your team the ability to go to your cloud console and provision all their own instances and things like that. That's probably not a great manageable thing to do at scale. So we built a system where it essentially provisions automatically for you. An administrator says, here's what you're allowed to have. And then you go through it, it comes up. And every time you create a project, it automatically provisions that for you. So you have to think about how you're provisioning these for your teams as it scales out to those teams. And then finally, we have to provide a way, how can we simplify the design work? Because I said, I'm sure everyone in this room is an awesome Python developer. I would not doubt it for a second. Otherwise, why would you be here? But I hate to tell you, but not everyone in your organization writes great code. There may be no one in this room, nobody in this room, but I guarantee there's a few folks that don't write great code. So what do you do about that, right? So we created a flexible authoring environment where you can write Python DAGs if you need to, as you're used to, but we also provided a simplified visual interface that lets the people that don't write great code just drag and drop the things they need. And then we also pre-configured all their connections, so they don't have to know about how Airflow connections work. They don't have to know about how, depending on your cloud provider, with AWS it's IAM, with other providers it's others. But basically, you don't have to worry about, when they have a project, the project boundary already provides all that integration. For our demonstration, we picked a scenario that you, as a group, may very well have to support yourselves within your organization. So the idea is show you how we've solved it within this tool, and to give you some ideas of things that you want to consider when you're trying to provision Airflow and its associated capabilities along with the rest of your team. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kamen to demonstrate.
Thank you, John. That was very insightful. Hi, everybody. My name is Kamen Sharlandjiev. I'm a senior specialist solutions architect with AWS. I've been with the company over 5 years, and I have the wonderful job to work with the largest customers around the globe and their adoption of Airflow. Now, I want to ask you something before we start with the demo. How many of you are actually building self-service portals for your internal customers on top of Airflow? Anyone? Good, few hands. Well, that was one of my surprises. So roughly 2 years ago, when I took on this position to work with Airflow and MWA with our customers, what I quickly found is that a lot of those customers are building these self-service portals on top of it. And one thing that I saw in common with those folks were they kind of overcomplicate. So they were building backward from some customer use cases, internal customer use cases, but for some reason they took the most complicated one when they were building the system. So I had to work with them back and forward to help them kind of take on the simple use cases first, because what is the sense of building a giant application that, or a kind of a platform that cannot support the simple use case? So start with simple and then build gradually on top. So for today's demo, what I want to show you is how we started working backwards from a simple use case about a customer, let's call it Alex. And let's pretend Alex has recently joined a company. He knows a little bit about Spark infrastructure. He's mostly used to drag and drop tools and low-code, no-code tools. and he's immediately kind of under pressure to deliver for his customer. So he needs to make sense of data that the business will give him. He needs to crunch it. He needs to analyze the data. Essentially, the business is asking, why is our sales not great, or how can we improve our sales? So this is the kind of the use case. But how I want you to take that is working backwards from that case to enable your internal customers, give them the right tools, and that's, of course, Apache Airflow, but there is also a lot of other tools that they will need. And that depends on the persona of the actual user that you're gonna have. So for Alex specifically, right, so day one, Alex will have to crunch some data. He will get data from a couple of CSV files. Let's keep it simple. So the business just handed over 3 CSV files with customer data, opportunities, and some support cases. And say, here you go, Alex, figure out what's wrong. And so what Alex will use is in Amazon, the next generation of Amazon SageMaker and SageMaker Unified Studio. So just very, very quickly, what SageMaker Unified Studio is under the hood. Like, let's remove the fluff. So basically, we have 3 foundational layers here. We start with an open data lakehouse, where all the data is standardized either in Apache Iceberg or different open table formats. And then on top of it, we introduce data and AI governance. So this is things like a business catalog, being able to produce data, to share that data with the rest of your organization in the right way, with fine-grained access control and so on. And then on top, we started thinking of, okay, how can we enable different persona to do different things, right? Because ML persona may have one set of tools, data engineer may have another data set of tools. And so for this demo, we're gonna focus on the data processing part, right? So in data processing, we figured, okay, well, customers will need to crunch some data, so they will probably use some Spark infrastructure. And then, they will have to orchestrate it, they will have to query it, they'll have to do some other things. And so let's kind of quickly, I'll quickly pivot to the demo. So I'll just make it quick. So this is kind of the landing page. So like John said, it's not always a great idea to allow your customers to go on the AWS console and provision whatever they want, right? So SageMaker Unified Studio is built outside of the console, so it uses a single sign-on, and it allows you to kind of log in with AEM Identity Center. So in here, I'm logging in with my credentials. And this is kind of the landing page. So if we scroll down here, you will see that you can start creating any project based on the use case you have, whether that's generative AI, data processing, and so on. And so the first thing that Alex will have to do is, he already have the data, so he will go and figure out that in his current project that he has, he doesn't have the data, he doesn't have anything. So first we're gonna upload the data, and that, like I said, is gonna be a CSV files. Now, the second thing is, remember, Alex doesn't know anything about this platform or your platform, so he needs to figure out things on the go. One thing that we decided to do here to allow customers to quickly kind of learn new technology is Amazon Q, which is our generative AI agent. So whenever you go in SageMaker Unified Studio, Q is following you, and so you can ask him questions such as, okay, well, I have my data in CSV, how can I query this data? How can I do stuff with it? And Q will tell you, well, it will give you a few options, and will say, well, if you're in SageMaker Unified Studio, you will probably have to create a data processing job that will catalog the data before you can query it. So that's what Alex will do, right? So he's going to go in building a visual workflow. So by the way, this is a new interface for kind of building visual ETL jobs. And as you can see, we start with a Q prompt. So we allow the customers to build visual ETL pipelines now just by kind of using natural language. So here I've already copied my data in the S3 bucket and say, hey, here's my data. Can you please figure out how do I catalog my data? And that's exactly what Q did. So it actually gave the S3 source, and then it kind of catalogs the data into SageMaker Unified Studio, into SageMaker Catalog. And one reason why we do this is, because we want to query the data. But here's the thing, right? We have 3 files, so we have to create 3 jobs. We have to run those jobs. We have to catalog the data. And here's the first place where orchestration can come in place, right? So here we already have created those 3 ETL pipelines. And then if we have to kind of quickly switch, I'm kind of mindful of time. So what Alex will do is he will create those jobs. Then he will go and create a Apache Airflow doc. However, because Alex is used to drag and drop tools, we have provided him here the ability to create docs without having to write a single line of Python code. So in this case, he's going to just drag 3 glue jobs or data processing jobs, and he's going to configure them. So here he's going to select the job, and he's going to save and run this workflow. Now, in this interface alone, as you can see, we haven't shown him Airflow UI at all so far, right? So the job will start. We use here the Apache Airflow APIs, so we can fetch some data about the runs and status of the jobs and so on. But more importantly, we also allow you to switch to the Airflow UI, which we all love, right? So here, this demo is with Airflow 2, right? It's not Airflow 3. Airflow 3 is coming, bear with us. It's going to come soon. But as you can see, so Alex was doing a visual ETL. That automatically gets synced, and now you can see the DAG here, right? So it's running. These 3 jobs will run successfully, and then he will be able to query the data. Now, the second thing he's going to do is he's going to start kind of understanding what data he has. Okay, so he's going to go figure out that now all the tables are cataloged. So he has catalog, account, case, and opportunity. He's able to use our query engine, which is based on Trino, to now start making sense of the data. And for those of you who know about Amazon Athena, this is kind of an improved interface on top of Amazon Athena, which gives you a multiple query book. Because Athena had this one query, and then you see the result, you have to change. So we figured out we can kind of make things a little bit more interactive here. And now that Alex had the sense of the data, right, he's going to start using some of the more sophisticated tools. So in SageMaker Unified Studio, we also provided a Jupyter, like a full-blown Jupyter notebook. So in here, I've already pre-uploaded a few books. By the way, I used Q here. This is code that I've written. And all those queries, I didn't write them. I simply open Q and say, here's my data. Can you help me figure out what's wrong? What is happening with my data? And as you can see here, I'm just fast forwarding, but Q helped me generate some nice dashboards with some KPIs and so on. So first job for Alex done, right? So he managed to create some dashboards. He managed to make sense of the data. Now, his final task is to automate this report because he doesn't want to go and do this manually. And for that, we're going to use Airflow, right? So here I'm showing you a second notebook where we kind of generated exactly the KPIs that the business wants to see in order to get some answers. And so what Alex will do is he's going to go back to workflows. He's going to amend the workflow that we already created, the doc, and he's going to add a few more nodes. In this case, he's going to add some notebooks here, and it's gonna just connect those, right? So just wire them, right? There you go. Job done. Save, run, and now as we can see again in Airflow, right? Save, run. There you go. Here we're doing a little bit of fast forward, right? Because those notebooks are quite extensive, so it took some time. So kind of Hollywood magic here to make it complete quicker. So now if we go back to the S3 bucket where the reports are going to be saved, right? So we automated the whole process. Luckily, we will have a report here. Right, this is the report that was created by Airflow with kind of Airflow orchestrating a couple of notebooks. So it's today dates, a little bit earlier on. And what was interesting in this data, which was of course generated data, but what was interesting here is what we found out is that the kind of the energy sector brings the most revenue for us, right? We can see it here on top. We have a lot of data. But when it comes to actually who is the most vocal customer, who is complaining the most, it turns out that the hospitality business was generating the most support cases and so on. So you can see that through SageMaker Unified Studio, which is our platform, but you build your own platform, right? You need to give your internal customers not only Airflow to orchestrate things, but also the right tool for the job, depending on the use case, so they can actually do an end-to-end pipeline, whether that's going to be MLOps, data processing, or anything like this. So I'll hand it over here to John. That was the demo that we had.
Thank you, Kamen. So, obviously that's a way that we've implemented it for folks that, don't have talented folks like you and that are in the audience here to build these vended solutions for them. We have one that's sort of off the shelf, right? This is our solution to provide an off the shelf assembly line for data and ML to customers. But you can take a lot of the same learnings for the things that you're doing to create this for your internal users, right? You're trying to move your users from expecting them to be craftsmen to standardization that allows you to support them and allows them to move much faster and be a lot more productive. We're taking manual processes, like in that first example that Kamen showed, where you're manually creating these reports, and we're removing that undifferentiated heavy lifting into automation. And obviously Airflow is a huge part of that. But it's not just the automation at the workflow level, it's automating the data discovery and the cataloging and the connectivity and all those things that ordinarily would be a manual process every single time a team wants to provision this stuff, right? You need to come up with a way that allows them to do that quickly so that for those of you that are supporting it, you don't have to constantly be in the loop. Also, we're moving from the idea of providing tools to providing assembly lines. Right? Instead of providing you the wrenches and the hammers and everything you need, you've got a ready to go factory and you can just walk in. And so if you're providing similar tooling for your users, that's sort of the mentality that we approach that you can look at for your internal teams, right? How do you provide your teams their assembly lines so that they work much more efficiently? And it's that efficiency plus the precision, the ability to have it work the same way all the time. The precision is most important for those of you that have to support these folks, right? If it's the same every time, then when the marketing team, no offense, marketing, I know when the marketing team comes up and says, "Hey, my data pipeline's not working," right? You don't have to go through and figure out, well, okay, what did they implement? What did they do? I don't understand it. You can say, oh, no, okay, they're using the tools that I provided. All I have to worry about is a slight difference that allow them to do. And that provision allows you to scale and be supported on these things. So if you are interested more in what we did specifically with SageMaker Unified Studio, of course, we've got our documentation for it. We also have a great blog that Kamen, among others, produced about how we are using that. It's a lot of the topic we had here. And listen, we'd be thrilled if you use how we implement it, but I'm even more excited to see how you use the things that we learned in doing so in building your own solutions on top of Airflow and to make you more efficient and your team more efficient.